Good morning. My name is Michael Mullen. For some of you, good morning, because I know some of you this is very earlier than my East Coast time. I believe for some of you as well, it's later in your afternoon and actually even evening, if I remember correctly. So appreciate everybody kind of coming and hanging out. What I wanted to do, this kind of came up last minute. I decided that my plans changed this weekend pretty dramatically as I look outside and we're getting at least 12 inches of snow on top of all the other snow we have. So I suddenly had an open weekend and spent some time talking about foam rolling with some of my clients over the last couple of weeks. Spent some time talking about it with some of the mentees in my mentorship program and said, there's a bunch of things that I do on the foam roller that I find quite effective and helpful. And so I thought I'd share it with people. So for those of you that are joining me, welcome. Nice to see you. I'm just going to bang through a few slides here real quick, just to set some to get you a little bit of background real quickly, kind of establish some guidelines, and then I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of things on the floor. I'm happy to open the field up to some questions afterwards. I will clarify some of the things that I kind of will be going through specifically, and then I definitely won't be going through and why. But I do look forward to sharing some thoughts with you, and I hope you find this stuff interesting. So concept number one, where did it come from? Just kind of brief background and history. This guy, Moshe Feldenkrais, was a physicist, basically from Europe, who came to the US and emigrated to the US and was actually the very first black belt in Europe, and had a bad injury and basically kind of recovered his own knee problem after having a lot of problems and a lot of surgical suggestions, and he decided to heal it on his own. Developed his own methodologies of movement. Some of you are probably familiar with Feldenkrais approach and Feldenkrais method. Awareness through movement is kind of some of his book and his philosophies. And what he did was he discovered actually in the mid 80s that these things that are foam rollers are used for packing. In particular, they were used for packing between cars when cars were shipped internationally to prevent them from bunking against each other. So he started utilizing and experimenting them with various balance activities and movement activities. And some of the people that he were students of his took that information and kind of built upon it. Sean Gallagher is one physical therapist who works with a lot of performing artists and dancers, and did a lot of work with himself as well as a lot of his dancers and shared it with them in terms of the soft tissue recovery piece. Kent Kaiser and Brian Hosworth, my buddy Brian out in San Rafael, California, started teaching a bunch of classes in the early 90s, late 80s, discussing the use of foam rollers for a number of different applications, a number of which we'll go through this morning as well. Again, different than the soft tissue work that I think a lot of people utilize it for. Mike Clark is a physical therapist, kind of took that in the early 90s and kind of built upon that piece. My apologies, mid to late 90s, and built upon that piece. And then from there, people like Eric Cressy and a number of other people started kind of writing about it more and more. It became more and more popular in various sort of physical therapy establishments and fitness facilities across the country. So it's kind of where we are today. And then it kind of like it just boomed. Then we had various people creating different products, different types, different styles built upon those principles. And I think that some of the initial concepts that I find quite helpful, which is a lot of what I do, has been kind of like lost in all of the noise. But some concepts to take into consideration. Number one, it's been advocated to increase performance, improve recovery, increase flexibility and range of motion, decrease DOMS, decrease pain, affect arterial function, and modulate the ANS. Obviously, these are some things that have been advocated for it. That being said, the dose, the density, and the dynamic are all highly variable. It's been very hard. There's a lot of research out there, but it's very hard to come up with solid information that's going to be consistent because of the differences in the densities, in the amount, and the dynamics of which they're actually applying those concepts of different types of interventions, utilizing these different things. And so there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of the findings have been quite variable, as well as the fact that you've got some outcomes and outliers that are also on top of that. Outcomes can vary based upon the three things we talked about before. Outliers such as body, shape, size, capabilities, underlying pathologies, age, and the list goes on, can also be other outliers that can influence response time. It seems to be effective within the research, improving tissue tolerance, decreasing the pain perception, enhancing recovery, decreasing DOMS, and then increasing flexibility prior to training. Seems to be, again, up for individual use, individual application on a kind of case-by-case and class-by-class basis, but keeping these things in consideration, this is all stuff that the research seems to support and suggest. The dosage for soft tissue mobilization, 30 to 60 second bouts. of 3 to 5 sets with 10 to 30-second rest periods in between seems to be most effective for the soft tissue benefits. But that's not what I use it for. I'm not against it. I discuss it. I demonstrate it. People who use a foam roller, I show them ways to make it much more effective because I do feel that there's a misconception of what happens with this soft tissue mobilization element that has become like lost in translation. Mashing tissue is not necessarily bad unless that's all you're doing. You're not going to accomplish individual fluid movement, enhanced layer by layer independence yet interdependence of tissue mobility, being able to affect and influence the rotational biases of bone structures and joint structures that are deriving some of the reason this connective tissue and the contractile tissue is in the position that it's in to begin with. So in order to affect change, we've got to go central to start and then work our way out. Screenshot this. I'm not going to read it. It's right there because I feel like I need to put out the contraindications, and you definitely want to put into place some of the cautions. What about this person? Number one, a lot of activity, a lot of muscle work. He's rolling on contracted muscles. Fine, no problem, if that's what you're looking to accomplish. He has contractile elements of tissue, trying to massage that to be able to help to create an impart a change, probably not as effective as if he let his legs relax more on those rollers. 2, watch what you're rolling on. Careful with rolling on ribs. Careful with rolling on structures that are actually our internal organs. She's mighty close to her kidney there. Careful. 3, arms overhead. She has a lot of neck activity. She's retraining her neck to become more active in her body's ability to be able to create movements. Careful. Rolling over bony protuberances. You want to take a greater trochanter bursa and irritate the heck out of it? Have them do that repeatedly. Not a good idea. You want to be careful with that, as you want to be careful with your population of people that you put them on and the positions you put them in. Her shoulders are not in an ideal position to allow her bodies to be able to move. Has she been questioned for osteoporosis? Careful with that stuff. I'm not sure about the knobs. Use them at your own desire, but certainly I can see how that might feel good, but it might create a reaction that's not going to be ideal, in particular since our thoracic area of our spine is our sympathetic part of our nervous system. Jacking that up even more, I'm not sure is ideal, depending upon what it is you're looking for in terms of your outcomes. Watch mobilizing bones and joints. Careful if you start kind of taking that on and suggesting that with your clients. You might potentially create an issue you don't even know about. In particular, her rib cage does not look like she's getting independent movement in the thoracic area. So think about movements, rotations, and be able to introduce, which we're going to show here in a second. And this one, that IT band, people don't get it. Everybody hates it. It never feels good. It never feels better. And I don't think that we're accomplishing what we think we're accomplishing. Okay. Screenshot it. It's effective for retraining tool, neurodynamic regulation, respiration restoration, relative movement enhancement, skeletal soft tissue integration. These are the things we're going to go through now. Told you I was going to go through it quickly. Pre and post intervention, scanning, and some movements. Positional setup and considerations matter a lot. Breath matters a lot. Self-references, contact points, and constraints matter a lot. Some progressions, and then with the concept that smaller is better and less is more. So let's demonstrate a few things. Number one, they're all good. I like the white ones in particular because I feel that they give a really nice density to it. I do know that they wear a little bit faster. I do know that they have a tendency to warp over time. I do appreciate that. But I tell people in particular, depending upon their tolerance to different densities, that this is going to be most comfortable for most people. The black ones work well as well. They're a little bit harder, a little more dense. If you've got someone who's got some soft tissue, sensitivities, things like that, it's probably not going to be quite as effective. So what's the first thing I have people do before I have to get on this? Lie on the ground and do what I call a scan. And just lie with their legs and arms straight and see what it feels like. Just feel their contact points, where things are touching and not touching. Left, right, top, bottom. Then I have them get on here lengthwise. And as they lie on here lengthwise, first thing I have them do is rest their hands on their lower ribs. Because many times people will go right to this type of a stretch, and more times than not, they can't even hit the ground. So we're trying to get a pec stretch out of this position. If they don't have the range of motion, it's not going to be ideal. So what I have them first do is just shimmy and just get used to being on here, lying this parallel to the spine, hands on the lower ribs. I have them take a couple of easy breaths in this position. More times than not, in and out of the nose, just to get expansion and compression. Let their bodies settle. Let their organs adjust to being on this. Then I'll have them rest their hands on the ground. More times than not, I start them palms down, and they're going to use their base. They're going to be using their backside muscles to gently slide their body from one side about an inch, and then to the other side about an inch. I'm just rolling off the spine, right onto the paraspinal muscles, influencing a little bit of the transverse processes on the side of the spine, one side, and then the other side. And I have them just feel that transfer of their body weight going from one to the other. I want to have them gradually get to a point where they don't need to use their hands as much to create that movement. I want it happening through here, here, and here to allow that transfer of weight through the body. Get the system to learn to be able to allow the changes of that organ internal mechanism to adjust as the body's changing its position. I'll have them play with their eye movements. So initially I have them just do it looking straight up towards the ceiling. Then I'll have them actually do a little turn their eyes to the side opposite that they're rolling to, back to the middle, opposite side, back to the middle. I'll have them go move their eyes to the opposite side, take a breath. That'll feel very different than they would normally if they just went to one side, opposite side. I'm creating a whole vestibular, optical, cervical, thoracic adjustment as they go through this. Once they get more comfortable with it, I have them go through larger ranges of motion, side to side. If they find a spot that feels particularly tight, I have them kind of stay on that spot, using, again, the opposite side of the leg that they're on to try and work on just massaging that tissue out. This is just strictly for thoracic, pelvic, sacral, soft tissue, connected tissue movement. If they roll off and lie back down and rescan, they'll feel that their body's lying flat. I have them get back on. Some other activities I do. If I want particular manipulation of structures, if I want to drive expansion, let's just say towards one area of the body a little bit, maybe block off another area. Might want to create a rotational element. I'd have them do something like this. Let's say I'm trying to drive a little bit more right-sided anterior expansion. If I have them roll towards their left, weights more on the posterior aspect of the right side, that will drive more expansion towards that right side. Have to take a couple breaths in that position. This left side is active, holding it up. So I'm getting a little bit of counter muscle activity for control of that inlet and outlet as we're working on being able to feel and sense that expansion on this side. If they need the other side, I might have them do it, but more times than not, people are a little bit asymmetrical, and so I'll have them do something based upon what I see and how they present to me. Another activity from a breath perspective is this. Hands in this position. So they're making a rectangle in this position. One hand's underneath, one hand's on top. In this position, I just have them stay here and take an easy breath. As they exhale, I have them reach towards the ceiling. Take a breath in this position. I'm going to be getting upper dorsal rostral to mid dorsal rostral expansion. If they bring these shoulder blades back, bringing this rectangle down just a little bit to their first sense of resistance. If they take a breath in, they're going to start getting a little bit more pump handle. The more the arms come down, the more I'll be driving that pump handle mechanics scale with a better expansion in this position because of the change in the position of the scapula. From this position, I'll have them take this, roll their body to one side. Now they really have to activate a lot of diagonal, coracoabdominal, pelvic musculature for control as they maintain this less stable position of their body. They will almost always feel a difference as they go from one side to the other side, maintaining this rectangle position. I'll have them stay in this position and then nice and easy, take this rectangle and turn it into a parallelogram. So as my arms go towards one side and the other, and my forearms stay parallel to the ground, There's a lot of oblique activity and intercostal activity that'll be activated as a result of it. Same idea, have them go side to side a couple of times. Then I'll have them go to one side, take a breath in. Exhale, go to the other side, take a breath in. Same idea, and I'm getting some rotational element. I'm getting some changes in my expansive and compressive capabilities because of the the mid to upper thoracic region changing its orientation and muscle position. Roll back off again. Have them rescan. As I'm in this position now, I keep getting flatter and flatter onto the ground. Again, tissue releasing, structuring or adjusting. The body's able to kind of settle into this position a little bit more comfortably. Then I have them do more. Again, these are not all in one session. I'm just giving you a number of different ideas of things you can play with. This one's called climb the rope. So feet flat on the ground, feel the arches, shoes on their feet so they have some good traction. Being aware of the surface they're on. If they're on carpet, it's not going to work so well. If they're on hardwood, it's going to be super slick. So having them find a surface that they feel stable with. Arms are in the air. They roll to the right and reach their right arm towards the ceiling. And you can see I'm creating a little bit of a rotational piece through my axial skeleton and rib cage. Take a breath in. Exhale. Opposite side. Exhale. And I'll look for quality of movement. I'll look for imbalances. Does one side look like it's more of a struggle than the other? Does it look like it's more difficult to have them expand on one side than the other? Then I'll have them emphasize that side. If this is the side they're struggling with a little bit more, I have them take an easy breath in. Exhale. Back to the middle, go back to that side. And again, same idea. All this musculature, all this positional control is establishing better pelvic sacral capabilities as I'm trying to restore better mid to upper thoracic and lower cervical activity. Activities on top of that. Once they've done this, I'll have them make it a little bit more dynamic. I'll have them actually reach a little bit more. One side, the other side. Maintaining my head contact on that roller the whole time. So I'm not compensating with a neck in this position. If this feels too unstable for them, I'll have them do this, let that opposite side come down, get a little bit more axial rotation. I'm feeling more activity of my medial hamstrings and adductors, maintaining this position because I'm not spreading my legs way out and allowing my base of support to change. So now I'm activating a lot of those real deep rotary muscles and pelvic control as I go from one side to the other side. Then I have them gradually work a little bit more overhead. Now they're working in this direction, little by little. Again, not holding their breath. Inhale, allow expansion on that side. Exhale across the middle. Inhale, allow expansion. Exhale across the middle. Again, back to the middle. Resettle themselves. Then I have them work a little more overhead if I see they have good overhead capabilities. What I call pick an apple from a tree. Inhale, reach. I feel restriction right there. I'm not going to keep going. My first sense of restriction, I go to opposite side, go to, and again, that opposite leg, hip, pelvis is working hard to allow that rotation to take place, allow things to rotate and turn and coil. So I'm getting activation of muscle activity and control at the same time. I'm manipulating soft tissue structures, connective tissue, as well as skeletal structure. I'm creating relative movement because that opposite side is getting some facilitation and activity. At the same time, it will create relative movement of ribs and sternum and pelvis and hip muscles. So now I've got a little bit more range of motion. I lay back down on the ground. I stand now. I'm really flat on the ground. A lot more contact, a lot more comfortable. It's very soothing. A lot of times people will just lie here for like, oh my gosh, it just feels great because everything has just really freed up. A few other things I'll have them go through. I want to work on individual, or if I see rib positions. Take it into this triangle position. If I put my hands palm to palm in this position, and I have them take this triangle and move it to one side, same idea. I'm getting some nice horizontal abduction on this side, horizontal adduction on that opposite side. I'm in an IR orientation here, ER orientation here. Take a couple of easy breaths. Exhale. Turn the other direction. Have them do side to side. You can vary the hand position as well too. This right here feels too easy. So as I come into this direction, keeping my arms straight, this is the side that feels very restricted to me. Take an easy breath in. Again, allowing time for things to expand. Coiling, turning, rotating as I go in this direction. Much easier. So again, I do a 2 to 1. I have them hold a position where now I want to have them think about, I want to get a little more of they have a hard helical angle. Let's say they have this angle of their rib cage. I'll have them do it at a little bit more of an upward angle. Because they might be struggling with getting those ribs to dissociate and open and free up like we want them to be able to do. So by changing that angle of movement, we'll bring them a little bit more into that diagonal state, which will allow the system to be able to get to a better position. Again, same idea. You can manipulate arm position. You can have them work on little by little, working on movement patterns, utilizing this unstable surface to help create better control of this upper and lower connection. So in this position, they can start here, working towards, can they get one side to lift, where they're able to kind of work on counter stabilization on that opposite side. So it's like a modified dying bug. You can see I struggle on that side, better control here. I have to really work on resetting my system to get my body to be able to stabilize on that opposite side. If I see that with someone, have them put their hands on the ground. Make sure I manipulate breath. Do a couple on the side that feels like it's off a little bit. See if we can restore a little bit of control in that position. Can they inhale there? Again, now I'm taking my diaphragm out of its postural role, allowing manipulation of my tissue and structures to allow that change to take place. Now, if I go back in this position and I go to my weak side first, because that's the side I want to help work on restoring, you can see that it's in a much more balanced position. I'm able to really help that to be able to get to a better place by just reinforcing the movement pattern that's restricted, making sure I keep my breath moving to allow my diaphragm and pelvic muscles to be able to do what they're supposed to do, up and down, taking that postural role out of the system. And then again, by all means, you can challenge it a little bit more. Well, I'm not a massive dying bug fan for people on the floor. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I do feel in this position, it helps to really activate medial musculature, that deep medial line, because of the control they have to restore in this position. With shoes on their feet, feeling arches contact points, they're able to really activate structures that help to get what I feel they're really going to be benefiting from a dying bug activity versus just doing it on the ground, trying to work on core strength. And again, I call it dying bug because if it's a dead bug, they'd just be like this. Again, roll back off again and get into this position. Because again, lying in this position, I'm much more comfortable in this position. I'm able to restore a little better control of my system. I've got better wobble, pelvis, sacrum. You can see my legs are all flopped out a little bit now. I did nothing to help restore myself first thing this morning, just to kind of show you the differences that the body can go through. In my mind, when we've been able to help balance that out and get the system a little bit more dynamically integrated, utilizing an unstable platform, create movements that allow relative movement to occur, find access and be able to better appreciate some of the little structures that the body won't have access to feeling quite as effectively on hard ground. It's a nice way to have the system be able to get to a much better place from a movement perspective, restoration of the differentiations of diaphragmatic control for pressure management, expansive compressive elements more than its postural that a lot of people have a tendency to take on with that. As I mentioned with some of the contraindications, I'll do some of these things with people with their back up against the wall. And by that, I mean, you can do the same type of movements with the foam roller up against the wall, with their feet out in front of them, getting a little bit of leverage that way, just to develop the movement control and get a little bit of comfort and tolerance to that pressure before you think about gradually moving them down to the floor. A couple other things from a soft tissue perspective I want to talk about. I'm not going to be discussing and demonstrating particular manipulations of bone structures because I don't feel that that's something that I want to feel like I'm introducing to people unless I've kind of gone through it with them specifically. I feel the possibility of that opening up a can of words of people self-mobilizing bone structures and trying to influence joint movements is something that I have a tendency to share in a little more cautious state because I don't want to do anything that might be contraindicated for somebody. or create some knowledge base for people that's contraindicated for people's ability to be able to do it on their own safely. So, movements. They're in this position. If you're going to roll with soft tissue, in my mind, you want to introduce movements, meaning, let's say I'm trying to get after a lateral, so it's going to be IT band, okay? So number one, let the leg relax. Number two, don't say IT band. Think about the vastus lateralis. Think about the femur. Think about the interosseous membrane on the lateral aspect of that femoral shaft. That's the stuff you want to think about really trying to influence. I'll go more towards the front side of the quad. Right here, I have almost zero tenderness. As I turn my hips in this position, I've now captured this aspect of the VL. That more times than not is what you're really trying to create the influence on if you're going to think about it from a soft tissue perspective. It's not IT band. That VL as a contractile muscle that has a rotational influence on femoral movement as the quadriceps going into its extended position has, over the course of time, the ability to be able to create imbalances by influencing. So in this position, I want to think about on that front, good contact, good balance, good control with my body in this position. I capture, I turn my hip and I grab that front aspect of that VL. So I pushed it towards the side, getting it in ER position, pushing it a little bit more laterally, taking away some of its more dominant oblique fiber pull. And as I do this in this position and I maintain that little roll through my pelvis, as I go up and down, now I'm influencing the resting state of that muscle. It's because my leg is relaxed. I've grabbed the tissue, turned it towards the outside. I've created a rotational element in my pelvis, hip, and femoral shaft. So now I'm going to have much more capability of being able to work on releasing the tissue because I'm moving the fluids and I'm moving the muscle fibers towards directions that they have a tendency to not want to get into. That's why they get so taut. It's the same idea with gastroc muscles. It's the same idea with other soft tissue structures. If I'm just doing this in this position, it's fine. But if I want to really influence the gastroc, I'm going to want to have it be more isolated to one side in a little more of a relaxed state. I want to think about getting between the fibers of medial and lateral gastroc. I want to go to a point that I feel my first sense of resistance, and I'll turn one way or the other way. This way, I don't feel much resistance. This way, I feel a lot of resistance. I've captured the lateral gastroc head. I've turned it to the side via pelvis and hip at the same time. Now, as I roll up and down in this position, I'm creating a change in resting position. At the same time, I'm maneuvering fluids, soft tissue structures, resting positions of things, but I'm not just doing it by mapping the tissue. Again, to me, more times than not, as I get that resting state and the structures to be able to change their position, then if I want to go massage them afterwards, it's much more effective. You don't need 3 to 5 sets because it's in a better resting place to begin with. And then any soft tissue work you want to do on top of that, my mind's going to be able to move fluids through that area much more effectively. So much like most things I do with most people, think turn, think rotation, recognize the importance of manipulating your body structure. Last but not least, when it comes to that, keep the air moving. When you're working with clients, they're going to have a tendency to be holding their breath because they're thinking, they're processing. They're going to be chatting with someone in a group class. They're going to be doing things like that. The more they keep their air moving, just easy, smooth and easy, in and out. If you have particular ways you want to try and manipulate their breath based upon a reach and a movement, go ahead and play with that a little bit. But it's very important that that airflow, that expansion and compression, that pump mechanism is constantly being stimulated and reinforced in good positions so the body learns something new above and beyond the movements and the changes in position. It's got an internal neurophysiological response that's going to be much more ingrained and have better outcomes and much better carryover into life. So just rattle through a bunch of stuff. Hopefully this has been helpful for some people. If anybody has any particular questions, feel free to pop into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and then kind of let me know.